Natasha, and thank you so much for joining me today. I have got a really fun card coming up today, and I can blame this one because I was creating this card here using embossing folders, and we did a little bit of ink blending, ran it through an embossing folder, and then added some gold on top of the embossing. But I used this Natural Flourishes stamp set from Catherine Pooler, and that one stamp in particular, I enjoyed colouring this one so much that this kind of set off this waterfall effect into this card next. So I am taking that stamp. Always make sure before you actually stamp down that you don't have any little pieces of fluff or towel or anything on it, dust or dirt, that is going to cause it to misstamp. So I'm going to ink this up a couple of times. I'm just using my normal cardstock. This is the 110 pound Frenchville brand, which I get from Spotlight here in New Zealand. I know you're able to get it in Australia as well. And to me, this is identical to the Recollections brand that I used to use. Now I'm going to stamp out this foliage 6 times, and I stamped it in some VersaFine Onyx black ink. I added some clear embossing powder, and then I heat set all of them, and here are all 6. Now I must admit these are not on watercolor paper. Watercolor paper for me is more expensive to purchase, so if I can get away with not using it, then I will. But there is a balance somewhere. Now, for this technique, I'm going to take 2 colours. This one happens to be Squeezed Lemonade and Mustard Seed, so like a darker and a lighter yellow. And although I'm positive it's not recommended, I tend to squeeze the lid a little bit until I get some colour on the inside of the lid, and I kind of end up using that as my palette. Obviously, I do not like to add too much water to this. I wouldn't put this back on top of my ink pad if it had any water or any significant amount of water there. I don't want to ruin my ink pads, but I do use this as a little palette, and I've never had any trouble for all of the years that I have been doing it. I've never ever cracked a lid or anything like that. Obviously, you want to be gentle whilst doing it, but as I said, I'm sure it's not recommended, but that's just what I do. Now, all I'm going to do here is add the lighter colour to the outside portion of the leaves and the darker colour to the inside portion. Now, I am using a water brush. This one happens to be the Altenew, I think it's the medium-sized brush. This is my favourite one for the last couple of years that I've been using, and all I'm going to do is get a really nice gradient between the two, a nice ombre kind of look. So for this one, I have the Abandoned Coral and some Candied Apple. Now, I don't have all of the Distressed Oxides. In fact, I don't even have half of them. And at this point, the rate that they are introducing them, I probably have around 1/3 or so of the colours. So I'm just kind of making do with what I have. If you don't have 2 shades of kind of each colour, then you could most definitely just use 1 shade and make sure it is really nice and concentrated at one end, and then much more weakened and diluted as you get towards the tip of the leaves. But I pretty much found that I was able to find 2-ish of each colour, and it just sometimes needed a different amount of water or a different strength. I was finding with the Abandoned Coral that I wasn't quite getting enough from just squeezing the lid, so I did pop some down onto an acrylic block, and then I just work away at it. As I said, this is not watercolour paper, so I do have to be a little bit careful. I don't want to add too much water here. Now here I'm using Shaded Lilac and Villainous Potion. These are very far apart from each other colour-wise. There are a lot of steps, a lot of shades in between these 2 colours, so it does mean I'm going to have to be careful. I add the Shaded Lilac to the outside edge, and I'm honestly using the tiniest little bit of the Villainous Potion. It is a really strong dark colour, which I absolutely love about it, but to make these 2 work, I need it to be pretty diluted to be able to pop it on there. But you can see I think I made it work okay. Next up is Salty Ocean and Tumbled Glass. Of course, you could use alcohol markers. In fact, if I used my tri-blend markers for these, I think I would be doing this probably even a little bit quicker, because in the tri-blend marker there is a light, a medium, and a dark, and that way I wouldn't even have to switch between pens, because it would all be in one pen, and that would make it super easy. Sometimes, like this one, I found that the blues I had chosen were not quite dark enough, so I actually brought in some Mermaid Lagoon and I'm going to use that as my darker blue down the very bottom. So it just depends on what you have in your stash, but anything that will add this kind of gradient of color. I do think I like the kind of two-tone of this. I think it adds a lot to a relatively simple-ish card. So we are nearly on the home stretch. I've done 4. I'm up to the Wild Honey and Spiced Marmalade. This one is kind of oranges-ish, so to speak. And Wild Honey is definitely not a colour I use very often, although I must admit, since I have picked it up a couple of times recently, I'm now kind of going to it more and more. So it is good to make a point to use the colours that we don't always reach for, I think, in my scenario anyway. I find that if I use them a little bit more, then it kind of leads to me using them even more, if that makes sense. On to the last one, we are doing some Twisted Citron and Mowed Lawn for the green. This is the same as I used on my original card, and this is the idea that started off everything. So at the moment, I love these leaves. I think that it is a great idea if you are a card maker or paper crafter to have a flourish or a some sort of foliage stamp, a good go-to kind of foliage stamp in your card making. And I must admit, this set is pretty good. I am really enjoying this stamp in particular, and I can't wait to make some more cards using the other two in the stamp set as well. The sentiments are pretty good, I must admit. I have been using those as well, which makes me happy because I don't like to see stamps wasted and kind of only using a couple of stamps from a set. I like to see the ideas that I could do with all of the stamps, including the sentiments. Now I have chosen to fussy cut these ones out. There are dies available for this, but I really buy dies these days. And that is not because I have a scan and cut or anything sort of fancy like that. It is purely because I have a budget and I have to make choices. And my choices are usually to buy more stamps and to save on the dies and do the fussy cutting. So once I had put these down on the card, I don't often make these kind of slimline style cards, but for this one in particular, I knew that I would need lots of space. There are going to be lots of people writing inside of this card, so that's often one of the times I will make a bigger card, and for this one, the slimline was just going to work really well. I am going to pop these up to give them a little bit more dimension, pop some foam tape on the back. That's another thing that I look at when I'm purchasing a stamp set. How easy am I able to do all of these things? How easy am I able to fussy cut these? How easy can I add foam on the back? If these little pieces of foliage are super short or super skinny, am I going to be able to add it on? What will it look like when I fussy cut it? All these different things go through my head, and again, this piece of foliage is perfect for this. I am going to fill that little space just down the bottom. So you could also, for this card, you can repeat any foliage, anything like that is going to work. And using some foliage or some fauna or grasses or something is very generic and means that it can really go for any recipient and any occasion. Depending on the colors that you use, obviously, you could change those up, and honestly I see this working in so many different ways. And so anything that you have, you can just repeat the background, repeat the stamp and pop it down your card front, and you are going to have a really good card started. Now to finish this off, this is the Celebrate Words Fancy Dies. But when I pop this down on here on the background, it kind of gets lost. This is a busy background, it's a colourful background, and even though I've die cut it in black, it is really getting lost there. So to help this out a little bit, I'm not going to introduce any new colours, but I do have a scrap of white cardstock. I'm going to take some liquid glue because I didn't die cut these out with any stick-it adhesive or anything like that, any double-sided adhesive on the back of it. So I'm going to just use some liquid glue and pop these down. I did play around with where the birthday should kind of go underneath the happy, and to make sure that you can clearly see all of the letters, the tops of the T and the H and the D and things, to make sure that they don't kind of meld into the bottoms of the P's up the top, if you know what I mean. So if I just shift it to the side just a little bit and then pop this down, wait for 1 minute for this to dry, and then I'm going to cut around this fairly close. I am cutting around this as though it is kind of the shadow die, so to speak. So I just follow the letters and the curves and bits and pieces of the letters, and then that will give me a gorgeous little shadow. You can choose how thick you want your shadow to be. Obviously I tried to keep it even all the way around, and this is another good reason for a good pair of fussy cutting scissors. These ones are the Cutter Bee scissors. They are pretty popular. They have been around for a long time and they don't seem to be going anywhere, which is fantastic. I have popped some double-sided tape on the back of this. I'm not going to add any more dimension because there's already dimension behind the leaves. There is plenty for this to grab onto, and now I can see that the sentiment is going to stand out beautifully amongst the background there. A little finishing touch that I always love to do from here is just to add a few little droplets or a few little gems. You could add some Nuvo drops, you could add some color pops, you could add some enamel dots. I mean, anything that's just going to give a little bit more. These ones are little, they're meant to look like glass, but they are acrylic, I believe. Nice and lightweight, and they come in, I think, 4 or so different sizes. I pop some on using a wax pencil and some matte medium. This is the Ranger multi-medium in the matte finish that's inside that glue bottle, and I think they have finished this card off beautifully. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have enjoyed this card today, and I really look forward to seeing you in the next video. All of the supplies that I've used, they are linked down below in case you would like to check them out and help me out here on YouTube. But thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye!